The UFC is the premier MMA organization in the world. At this point, they have pretty much the majority of the best talent. Getting to the promotion is hard, staying there is even harder. But outside of the UFC, there have been many champions who've looked unbeatable, dominant, certainly better than your average UFC fighter. But are they actually? If you're dropped from the UFC, well, these days you're spoiled for choice on which promotion to go to next, and we've seen plenty of your standard ex-UFC athletes who left the promotion for being, well, average, head to other organizations and take it to even the most dominant of champions. Sometimes things go the other way, where the baddest fighters on the planet have arrived in the UFC ready to continue dominating, only to be shut down by your average UFC Vegas fight night staple. I'm Bailey from MMA On Point, and this is 10 highly touted champions that lost to average UFC fighters. Number 10, Manel Kape. How old were you when you had your first fight? I bet it was a good old playground scrap. Well, I highly doubt it was an amateur MMA fight at the age of 14, but then again, your name's probably not Manel Kape, who had a bunch of boxing fights before even that. He spent his early career on the regional circuits of Portugal, Spain and France before being invited into the Rising Bantamweight Grand Prix in 2017, where he arrived as an unknown but TKO'd Ersan Yamamoto and Ian McCall in the first round, before eventually losing to Horiguchi in the final, which is pretty impressive for your first time in the big show. But flash forward just 1 year and he'd KO'd his way to a title shot at Rising 20 against Kai Asakura, and he just blasted him 30 seconds into the second round. 3 months later and he signed a 4-fight contract with the UFC, and the fan base was pretty excited. Kape was a 125er with explosive power and could end a fight in an instant. But his first two opponents, Rogerio Bontorin and Alexandre Pantoja, pulled out with injuries and he had to wait. He was even positioned as the replacement should either Brandon Moreno or Davison Figueiredo fall out of UFC 256, and that's how much hype was behind him. Finally, in February 2021, he made his debut against Alexander Pantoja and lost to unanimous decision. Pantoja wasn't a world beater, but he was pretty legit as far as 125ers in the UFC go. But then just 1 month later, he filled in as a replacement for Taiger Ulanbekov against the completely unknown Matthias Nicolau. Kape was the former Rising champion. This was a contest he should pretty easily win, but it was way closer than it should have been, and it went to the judges' scorecards where Nicolau was given a split decision. Manel had been super hyped as a champion, but it just didn't translate on his arrival. Number 9, Takanori Gomi. Like a blazing inferno, the fireball kid Takanori Gomi blew through 24 opponents in his first 8 years in the sport, dropping only 2 losses on the way. It wasn't just the amount of wins though, he blasted through people, throwing punches from the hip like he was slinging a baseball. He really became a star in Pride, however, joined the promotion in 2004, and in just his second fight, he scored the fastest KO in Pride history over Ralph Gracie in just 6 seconds. Hadouken! He picked up 9 more wins as well as the Pride lightweight title, which he never lost, by the way. And by the time Pride was bought by the UFC, the only person he'd lost to in the whole history of the organization was Marcus Aurelio. But they rematched later that year. This time the belt was on the line and Gomi got the win. He technically also lost to Nick Diaz in the last proper Pride show ever, but Nick was a little blazed for that one, so it was a no contest. But as Pride ended, Gomi was the champion and he eventually got into the UFC. Everyone was keen to see how he measured up against the roster. He made his debut headlining his own fight night card against Kenny Florian, who's above your average UFC fighter, and still tapped Gomi in the 3rd round. Still, that was forgivable, and he bounced back with a 1-minute KO of Tyson Griffin right after, reminding everyone who he was. You know, the former and only ever Pride lightweight champion. But then he started to face the rest of the roster, and it all just started falling apart. He lost to Clay Guida, Nate Diaz, Diego Sanchez, Miles Jury, Joe Lozon, and eventually John Tuck and even Dong Hyun Ma, who are, pretty average UFC fighters, especially compared to the names he was beating in Japan. Sadly, it became apparent that his best years were behind him. He was a true legend back in the day, but he went from one of the top lightweights on the planet to unfortunately losing to your everyday UFC fighter, although I'm sure age also played a factor. Number 8, Brandon Vera. It's the truth, at one point in time, Brandon Vera was a pretty interesting UFC prospect. You see what I did there? After going just 3-0, he won the WEC Heavyweight Grand Prix. He was a big guy, had great Muay Thai and flexibility for a man of his size, and was so invited to join the Ultimate Fighting Championship, where in just 1 year he knocked off 4 contenders, but eventually met people like Tim Sylvia, Fabricio Verdum, and a young John Jones, and after winning one of his last 6 in the UFC, was cut from the promotion. But one championship had just been getting started in Asia, so he packed his bags and headed east, and then picked up the inaugural heavyweight title in 2015 with a head kick knockout of Paul Chang in just 30 seconds, reinventing himself in the process. He then held onto the belt for 6 years. He even went down to light heavyweight to challenge An Larton Sang for the title because, well, there wasn't much room to do at heavyweight anymore. That was until Arjun Buller arrived on the scene. Buller had been given his shot in the UFC, going 6-0 in the Canadian regional scene, where he was also a standout wrestler. He beat Luis Henrique, but lost to fellow unknown Adam Wajorek by an omoplata of all things. Heavyweight, I know, crazy. He fought out his contract and won championship, opened their doors. Always in the market for heavyweights, of course. A fairly average UFC career, if you ask me. He didn't really stick around long enough to find out much else. He won his one debut against Morio Cirilli, and so after the pandemic had cleared up, was booked to face the long-reigning champion Brandon Vera. The two men felt each other out in a technical affair, but Buller was eventually able to secure the takedown in the second round and started unloading punishment until the ref just waved off the action. Yeah, Arjun Buller, that guy no one really knew or remembered, came out of nowhere and beat the 6-year reigning champion, also making himself the first fighter from India to win an MMA world title. So I guess maybe you ain't heard of him, but he's probably a superstar somewhere. Number 7, Bibiano Fernandez. Not many kids grow up in the Amazon rainforest, but well, if you're Bibiano, you don't have much of a choice. At age 7, he was sent to live with his aunt in the jungle. In fact, he didn't attend any form of school until he was 9, and by 13 he'd already discovered jiu-jitsu, so it was basically a wrap at that point. The guy was going to be a fighter. After dropping 2 early losses to Uriah Faber and Kid Yamamoto, understandable really, over the next 11 years he would lose only once more and won a slew of tournaments along the way. The Dream 2009 Featherweight Grand Prix, the 2011 Bantamweight Grand Prix, and eventually in 2013 the One Championship Bantamweight title, which he held onto with an iron fist for the next 5 years, racking up 6 defenses in the process and a 22-3 record. He did drop the title to Kevin Bellion via split decision in 2018, but then he beat him twice in back-to-back fights right after. He was the king of bantamweights in one. But in the meantime, an ex-UFC fighter had slowly been making his way up the rankings. How'd you get a nickname like Hands of Stone?
Sean Hands of Stone!
Well, apart from being a fan of Roberto Duran, you need to knock the fuck out of people, and well, yet John Lineker is pretty good at that. He spent 7 years in the UFC, even contested for a title, which wasn't much of a contest actually, and eventually started losing to the elites of the division. So he looked for new opportunities, which included one championship. He debuted in 2019, picked up 3 wins, and in March 2022 challenged the longtime king Bibiano Fernandez, where in the second round he found his killer combination to the body, then the head, and he was the new champion. Yep, he'd beaten some of the guys in the UFC, but struggled against the best in the division. But OVEREEM won. He'd come in as an ex-UFC guy and definitively KO'd the champion, a man who'd never been finished in his career. Number 6, Anthony Pettis. The final ever WEC event went out in style, mainly due to the performance of Anthony Pettis that night. If you remember,
He ran off the wall like a ninja and landed a high kick.
and he did it against Benson Henderson, one of the best lightweights in the world, in the final round of their championship fight in the last ever fight in WEC history. Showtime, baby. Either way, the WEC was purchased, and the last champion, Anthony Pettis, was expected to fight the UFC champion, whoever that was going to be, between Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard. The only problem was they fought to a draw, and it kind of left Pettis in limbo. The trilogy fight between Gray and Frankie was scheduled for UFC 130, but they both got injured, and Pettis thought, fuck it, I'm not going to sit around, and took the fight the UFC offered against Clay Guida. Anthony had shown flashes of brilliance, was able to perform kicks you wouldn't see outside of a Jackie Chan movie, and was highly marketable as a result. But nah, Clay Guida didn't care about any of that. The two fought at the Tough 13 finale, and Guida took him down over and over and over. Yeah, Anthony threw some flashy kicks, but Clay got 5 takedowns and 10 minutes of control time over the WEC champion. Although Guida has definitely shown his longevity in the sport, he's always been hit and miss in the UFC. Not exactly one of the elites, just a good solid competitor, and along came a near undefeated Marvel superhero of a champion who was controlled and dominated for the entire contest. Number 5, ALISTAIR Overeem. Being a 90s kid and of course a fan of explosions, Stallone's Demolition Man literally blew my mind. I mean, how could it not? Wesley Snipes was in it, and we all know he's good enough to fight in the UFC, even if it is against Joe Rogan. Well, when I got a bit older, I discovered there was another Demolition Man. Not famous for recklessly blowing things up and endangering innocent lives with collateral damage. No, a man famous for demolishing faces, organs and brain cells with his knees, guillotines and just general all-round destructiveness. Overeem had already enjoyed a fairly decent career by the time Pride ended, and after that he grabbed the inaugural Strikeforce Heavyweight Championship in 2007. Almost won the Dream Middleweight Grand Prix as well, but was clattered in the knackers by Crocop, and won the Dream Heavyweight Championship in just 19 horrifying seconds of devastation. Then we all found out he was finally coming to the UFC, and we all basically lost our shit. In his debut, he blasted Brock Lesnar into retirement. Granted, he just had diverticulitis, and after a drug suspension was matched up against Bigfoot Silva, who over him basically said he was better than in, well, every aspect of MMA.
I'm better in the stand-up, I'm better in the ground, I have more knockout wins, more submission wins. I'm better in every aspect.
Well, he was on a 12-fight unbeaten streak, but that turned out not to be true. He won rounds 1 and 2, but in the third, slowed down, was pinned against the cage as Bigfoot played Bop It with his head. Twist it. Ow! It didn't end there, though. He fought Travis Brown next, who only had 1 loss, but fought nowhere near the same level of competition, and in another fight, Overeem was dominating. He started spamming that pesky front kick, eventually landed it on his chin, and it was another loss for the incredibly hyped champion against, well, kind of your everyday UFC guy. Number 4, MAMED KHALIDOV. I'm always happy to see another Englishman make it to the UFC, especially if he's from old Donny up north. But let's face it, Scott Askham didn't have the best run once he got to the big show. He arrived undefeated, but it was hit and miss. He picked up 2 wins, ended up losing his debut to Magnus Siedenblad, and then Christoph Jotko, Jack Hermansson, and finally Brad Scott before his contract was up, and yeah, he didn't get re-signed. I mean, he didn't even get to fight outside of Europe. But hey, why even leave? I mean, there's plenty of good promotions there, like KSW, and the year after his UFC release, that's where Scott found himself. He got a 1-minute body kick KO of the night against Michel Martea in his debut, and then followed it up with another first-round dispatchment of Marcin Vujic in the semi-final of the KSW middleweight tournament. He was so impressive with these 2 performances that he was given a shot at the vacant middleweight championship, and he only went and bloody won it, didn't he? Beating Michel Martea for the 2nd time with a punishing flying knee after a heck of a war. Yep, that's right, this UFC journeyman somehow battled his way to a KSW world title, and then he fought MAMED KHALIDOV, a man who at one point had been on a 15-fight win streak and was basically the guy of the promotion, their golden boy. They fought at KSW 52, and in a move that kind of surprised everyone, Scott Askham took him 3 rounds and beat him. Yeah, not bad for your average UFC fighter. We got through that one, fuck me. Number 3, Will Brooks. What was more surprising than Will Smith's Oscar slap? Well, arguably Will Brooks' ascension up the Bellator roster. It's not because he didn't expect him to do well, it's just, well, no one really knew who he was. But he joined the Season 9 Bellator lightweight tournament and won all 3 of his matches in 2013, putting himself in line for a shot at the belt. But Eddie Alvarez and Michael Chandler had just rematched in a Fight of the Year contender. Bellator had a gold mine in the trilogy fight, and they were scheduled for a rubber match, but just 1 week out, Eddie got a concussion and had to pull out, and Will Brooks stepped in and basically ruined everyone's weekend. He split decision Chandler and was crowned the interim champion. Yeah, no one saw that coming. Then Eddie just up and left for the UFC, and Bellator didn't want to promote Will to champion, mainly because he didn't renew his contract and they were worried he would also up and leave. So they booked Chandler vs Brooks for the actual title, and well, Brooks won again. Then he defended the belt twice in 2015 before, leaving the promotion for the UFC. But still, no one thought much of him. Then he went and beat one of the best lightweights on the planet. Twice. On his arrival, he beat Ross Pearson in his UFC debut, but then in his second fight was matched up against the good old UFC staple Alex Oliveira. It was back and forth, and let's face it, Alex didn't even look like he tried to make weight, but the 18-1 Bellator champion could not get his game going and was KO'd late in the 3rd round. Then he jumped on the UFC 210 card against Charles Oliveira and unfortunately fell victim to his rear naked choke in the 1st round. After that, he headed to Australia to take on another divisional vet in Nick Lentz, somewhat of an easier contest than Alex perhaps, but Nick proved to be the better grappler and he tapped in with a guillotine. Unfortunately for Will, that was just it for his UFC career. 3 straight losses and he was let go, from a world beater in Bellator to kind of just being outclassed in the UFC. Number 2, Lima Lay McFarlane. You remember that girl who KO'd that soccer mom at that regional show? Yeah, that one. Well, if you didn't know, she grew up to be one of the most dominant forces in women's MMA outside of the UFC. Lima Lay McFarlane has spent the last 7 years in Bellator completely clearing out the 125 division with a relentless striking and seriously dangerous Venus flytrap of a submission game, which has seen her earn a brown belt in 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu and win the only ever 125 Women's Eddie Bravo Invitational. She was crowned the inaugural Bellator flyweight champion in 2017 and defended her belt 4 times, beating UFC vets and other Bellator up-and-comers, until she bumped into Juliana Velasquez, who was also on a 10-fight win streak of her own. They had a showdown to see who would keep their O. Juliana won that battle along with the title, and that was the first loss in Lima Lay's career. So Bellator headed to Hawaii, and being from the islands herself, it was a bit of a homecoming for Lima Lay. So who should she fight? I know, how about the ex-UFC fighter Justine Kish, most famous for, well, pooping in the cage, I guess. As she said, shit happens, but she didn't get kicked out of the UFC for that. No, it was her 1 win in her last 5 fights that got her walking papers. She'd not really managed to beat anyone of note apart from her debut against Nina Ansaroff, and that was before she was even Nina Nunes. So she went to Bellator, where she, well, unfortunately lost again in her debut against Deanna Bennett, but I guess because of her status as an ex-UFC fighter was booked in Hawaii against Lima Lay. Now, to be fair, Lima had just had knee surgery and had been rehabbing for about a year, but everyone expected the former champ to handily beat the UFC dropout. But of course, with the deepest satirical laughter, the MMA gods smiled as Justine made it a fight, pouring with her strikes, disengaging from the grappling and getting a few takedowns of her own. She didn't let Lima get started and shockingly won the fight via decision. Yeah, not many people saw that coming. Kish, let's be honest, didn't have the best UFC career, but she still managed to beat the long-time champ. Number 1, Hector Lombard. There was a period of MMA history where Hector Lombard was probably the best unsigned talent outside of the UFC. He was like a mini Yoel Romero, also Cuban, also an Olympian, but in judo, not wrestling, and he was also a physical specimen the likes of which we rarely see. And yeah, that all translated fantastically into MMA. If you like violence, yep, well, you got it with Hector, and the guy had looked pretty much untouchable. In fact, between 2007 and 2012, he went on a 25-fight unbeaten streak. Yeah, that's almost as long as Khabib's whole career. The UFC tried to sign him in 2011, but he had some visa issues and didn't make the UFC UFC until 2012, where he was supposed to fight Brian Stann and Tim Boesch was supposed to fight Bisping. Well, those two got injured, so Lombard was booked to fight the Barbarian at UFC 149. Before the fight, Goldberg and Rogan did a good job hyping up the new arrival, calling his win streak one of the most impressive in MMA, and to be fair, they weren't wrong. The fight started and Lombard kinda zombie-stalked Boesch around the octagon, looking tired after about 90 seconds, and by the end of the first round, the fans' cheers of anticipation had kinda turned into boos. Joe called him out in the second for not being aggressive enough, but both men were kinda just standing there. It wasn't that Tim was winning, it's just that Hector wasn't really doing much of anything and he was supposed to be, you know, the guy. I mean, before this fight, people were calling him a threat to Anderson Silva. Yikes. Well, that continued throughout the third and it ended with a rather disappointing decision. Lombard spent the whole fight fishing for a lead hook that never really landed, and Tim was just kind of more active. It went from being one of the most highly anticipated UFC debuts to a bit of a laughingstock. It wasn't like Tim dominated, but you probably couldn't pick a more average UFC competitor, but the boos were constant by the end of the fight and Lombard's epic run ended in quiet fashion. I'm Bailey from MMA On Point, and yes, we are finally here in our brand new office. Let's go check it out.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to our MMA Challenge of the Week.
Today, I'm joined by the greatest referee in the world, Mr. Mark Goddard.
I would punch him straight in the back of the fucking head.
That's right, a brand new channel with brand new content. Welcome to Fight Front, the home of personality-driven MMA.
Today, it's an MMA challenge where I take the worst rated UFC character in UFC Undisputed 3 all the way to the heavyweight championship of the world.
And I'm reacting to Colin McGregor.
Make sure you scroll on down and hit subscribe because you do not want to miss all the new content coming your way on this brand new channel.
And hey, it's me, Tommy Toehold, and I'm rolling around on a damn monitor.
Big shout out to my man Lawton for editing today's video. Jump on over to Twitter and follow him at Lawton_Veerkamp. Shout out to Ben Rosette and the excellent music he provided during the intro video. His music can be found on streaming platforms everywhere. There is a link in the description, and follow him at Ben Rosette on Instagram and on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, today. Please go ahead and like and subscribe if you did enjoy the content. We upload at least 3 videos every week for your viewing pleasure. Go ahead and leave a comment below if you want to join in the discussion, and follow us on Twitter at MMA On Point and myself at Balian_plays. You can now jump in and join the community Discord as well if you want to continue the discussion further, and I hope you've enjoyed yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.